My name is Mara Callens. I was 31 years old when I spent the last $84,300 of my savings on a decommissioned gas station at the corner of Ferris Road and Cutter Avenue in Delwood, Ohio. I had no business plan written on paper. I had no investors, no partners, no safety net. What I had was 3 years of severance, a logistics coordinator's instinct for undervalued assets, and a property listing that had sat untouched on the county auction site for so long the thumbnail photo had turned gray from compression. The station had been called Ferris Road Station once. The sign had lost its letters one by one over the years until only the metal backing remained, bolted to a pole, catching the morning light like a blank billboard for something nobody remembered. There were 2 pumps still standing, rusted at the base. The convenience store had plywood where the front window used to be. Behind the store was a cinder block storage room with a padlock that took me 40 minutes to cut through on the first day I held the keys. The county file listed the storage room's contents as unknown. I had noticed in the property photos, blurry, compressed, taken years before anyone thought to look again, what appeared to be a metal cabinet pushed into the far corner of that room. I filed it away the way I filed everything in those early days, something to get to. I stood in the gravel lot that first morning with the deed in my coat pocket and the wind coming hard off the flat fields to the west, and the air smelled of old motor oil and turned earth, and I thought, this is either the most deliberate thing I have ever done or the last one. My family thought they already knew the answer. I grew up in Delwood watching my father run Callens Hardware on the south end of town. He opened at 7 and closed at 6 days a week for 22 years. When I was small, I thought that was what work looked like. A man who knew every SKU in his own store, who could tell a customer the thread count on a bolt by feel. I wanted that. Not the hardware store specifically, but the knowing. The ownership of a thing you had built from the inside out. My brother Derek was 4 years older and had gone into insurance adjusting. He made good money. He wore a jacket to work. My parents talked about Derek's salary the way people talk about a weather system, something large and inevitable and reliable. They talked about my work history the way people talk about a long detour. Understandable, maybe, but not the route. I had spent 7 years in logistics, coordinating freight movements for a distribution company that downsized twice and then closed entirely. 7 years of reading the gap between what contracts promised and what routes actually delivered, of tracking the difference between what something cost on paper and what it was worth when the doors opened. I learned to move carefully through uncertainty. I learned that the people who got hurt were usually the ones who stopped paying attention before the full picture came in. When the company folded, I had a severance package, a savings account that had grown quietly for 3 years, and a very clear understanding that I did not want to go find another company to work for. I wanted to own something. I found the Ferris Road listing on a Tuesday evening in October. The county had taken the property for back taxes 2 years prior. The previous owner had operated it sporadically through the 90s and then walked away. The auction price had dropped 3 times before it reached a number that made me set down my coffee and lean closer to the screen. $84,300. For a corner lot, a structure, 2 pump islands, and a storage room listed in the file as contents unknown. I called the county office the next morning. I drove out to Delwood that afternoon. I walked the property for 2 hours. I submitted my bid that night. When the county confirmed the sale 2 weeks later, I told my parents over the phone. My mother said, "Oh, Mara." My father said nothing for a moment and then said, "You used all of it?" My brother Derek, who was at their house when I called, picked up the extension and said, "You're going to lose everything. You know that, right?" I told him I knew the risk. He said, "That's not the same as knowing you're going to fail." I did not answer that. The first thing I did was clear the convenience store. I rented a dumpster and spent 4 days pulling out rotted shelving, mouse-damaged ceiling tiles, a refrigeration unit that had grown a skin of black mold, and approximately 600 pounds of miscellaneous debris that previous tenants or squatters or just time itself had deposited across the floor. I wore a respirator mask and work gloves that I replaced twice when the fingers wore through. The work was not glamorous and it was not fast, but it was the kind of work that showed you exactly where you stood at the end of every day. The floor a little cleaner, the walls a little more visible, the shape of the thing beginning to emerge. I repaired the front window frame and had new glass cut. I replaced 3 sections of subfloor that had gone soft near the back wall. I rewired one circuit panel with a licensed electrician I found through a county contractor list, and I paid him in cash from a small buffer account I had kept separate from the purchase. Every decision I made in those first 2 weeks was documented. Materials sourced, labor hours logged, costs noted in a column on the right side of each page of my legal pad. Evenings, I drove back to my rental apartment in Delwood proper, ate something, and then sat at my kitchen table mapping the next day's work. I tracked every hour. Not because I planned to show anyone, but because I had learned in logistics that if you do not count what you spend, you cannot know what you have built. The pumps were a more complicated problem. I got 2 quotes for decommissioning and replacement. The numbers were not small. I put them on a separate page and did not touch that page yet, because the storage room was still locked and I had learned in 7 years of freight work that you do not price the whole job before you open every container. My brother Derek drove past the station twice in those 11 days. Once he slowed down and rolled his window halfway and looked at me standing in the lot with a pry bar in my hand. He did not stop. He drove on. My mother called on day 7 to ask if I had eaten. She did not ask about the station. She asked if I had thought about calling the logistics firm in Columbus that a friend of hers had mentioned. I told her I was fine. She said, "I just worry." I said I knew. She said, "Your father thinks you should cut your losses before they compound." I said I would think about it. Neither of us believed that. The storage room was the last room I got to. I had been working the station for 11 days by the time I cut the second padlock, the one on the interior door, and pushed it open. It was a cinder block room, maybe 12 by 14 feet. Metal shelving on 3 walls, most of it bare. A workbench along the back. And in the far left corner, the cabinet I had seen in the photos. A 2-drawer steel file cabinet, gray, its surface covered in a fine orange dust that had settled over years of no one coming in. I did not open it that day. I swept first. I inventoried the shelving. I took photographs. I noted the cabinet in my log without speculation. The dinner happened on a Thursday evening, 12 days after I bought the station. My mother had called that morning to say she was making pot roast and would I come. She said it the way she always said it, warm, specific, no pressure visible on the surface. By that point the evenings had started to feel very long and a home-cooked meal sounded like solid ground. I said yes. I arrived at the house on Brenfield Drive at 6. Derek's car was in the driveway. That was the first thing I noticed. We ate mostly in quiet for the first 20 minutes. My mother asked about the station in the way people ask about a medical condition they expect to hear is worsening. Small questions. Careful tone. How's the cleanup going? And are you managing the costs? My father cut his pot roast into precise squares and did not look up when he asked, "Have you had anyone look at the pumps?" I told him I had 2 quotes. He said, "And?" I said I was still working through the numbers. He set down his fork. "Mara," he said, "we are trying to be supportive. But this is not a sound investment. You know that." "I don't know that," I said. My mother touched her napkin to her mouth. Derek reached for the bread basket. "You spent your entire savings," my father said, "on a property that has been abandoned for 30 years. You have no operating capital. You have no permits. You have no tenant." "I have 11 days of work and a cleared structure," I said. Derek said, "That's not an asset, Mara. That's just labor." Something went taut across the back of my shoulders. Not defensiveness, not the urge to argue. Something older and quieter, like a cable under load. "Labor builds things," I said. "Not always," Derek said. "Sometimes labor just delays the inevitable." He leaned back in his chair. "You've always done this. You find some idea and you pour yourself into it and then you're surprised when it doesn't work out. Remember the subletting thing? Remember the pop-up? Those were different. They were the same pattern. You don't think things through. You never have." He picked up his water glass. "Dad put money into the subletting situation. Did you know that? He never told you." He covered your losses because he didn't want you to feel bad. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind. I looked at my father. My father looked at his plate. Is that true? I asked. My father said, we were trying to help. $2,000, Derek said. He just absorbed it. Because that's what this family does, we absorb your decisions. My mother said, Derek. It's the truth, he said. And now she's done it again. Bigger. And she sits here like we're supposed to just say, well done, Mara, good for you. He looked at me directly. You are 31 years old. You are not a kid. At some point you have to stop being so ungrateful for what this family has given you and start thinking about what you're actually capable of. The words sat in the air between us. I did not move. There was a pressure behind my sternum. Not anger, not shame, something more like a door swinging shut on a room I had been walking toward my whole life without knowing it. My mother said my name softly. I picked up my fork. I finished the last 3 bites of my dinner. I folded my napkin and set it on the table. Thank you for the meal, I said. I drove back to the station. I woke at 5:30 the next morning. I dressed in the dark, the same work clothes I had laid out the night before. I drove to Ferris Road through streets that were still empty, the stoplights cycling through their sequence for no one. I parked in the gravel lot and sat for a moment with the engine off. I got out. I unlocked the front door of the convenience store and pushed it open. I walked through the cleared floor to the back hallway. I turned on the work light I had clipped to the storage room doorframe. It threw a cone of yellow light across the cinder block and the bare metal shelving. I pulled on my work gloves, working each finger in. I crossed the room to the file cabinet in the far left corner. I looked at it for a moment. The gray paint, the fine orange dust across the top, the 2 drawer pulls worn smooth from years of use before the years of nothing. I gripped the handle of the bottom drawer. I held it there for a moment. I pulled. The drawer dragged open with a low metallic scrape, the steel lip catching for a moment before releasing. A stripe of rust orange dust transferred to the heel of my palm through the glove. The drawer was not empty. Hanging files. 10 of them, maybe 12. Manila folders, labeled in faded typewriter ink. The tabs read things like equipment logs and supplier accounts, and near the back, one that simply said property full. I reached in. I took out the property full folder. Inside were 3 documents clipped together. The top sheet was a county tax receipt from 1991. The second was a plat map, hand-annotated, showing the Ferris Road lot with its boundaries clearly drawn. The third was a single page I had to hold up to the work light to read. It was a mineral rights assignment. Dated 1989. Signed by the previous owner, assigning subsurface rights for the Ferris Road parcel to himself under a personal LLC, which, according to the note clipped below it in different handwriting, had been administratively dissolved in 1994 for failure to file. When an LLC dissolves without transferring its assets, those assets revert. I knew that from logistics. I had seen it happen twice with freight company subsidiaries. When a company dissolves without transferring its holdings, the assets revert to the underlying owner, or in a property sale, pass with the deed. I set the folder on the workbench. I took out my phone and opened the Harwick County Property Records app. I typed in the parcel number from the plat map. I waited while the screen loaded. The entry came up. I scrolled to the subsurface rights field. It read, mineral rights, unencumbered. Pass with deed. Last recorded transfer, sale date current. I laid the phone flat on the workbench beside the open folder. I stood in the storage room at 11:14 a.m. on a Thursday, with rust on my palm and a work light swinging slightly in the draft from the open door, and I looked at what I had purchased for $84,300. I drove to the Harwick County Recorder's office that afternoon. I brought the folder. A clerk named Patricia reviewed the mineral rights assignment and the dissolution record and the current deed. She made 3 photocopies. She stamped the copies with the county seal and handed them to me across the counter without ceremony. The subsurface rights transferred with the deed, she said. That's correct per the record. And the appraised value of the subsurface parcel? I asked. She pulled up a screen and angled it slightly toward me without quite turning it my way. The figure was $618,500. For the mineral rights alone. I drove back to Ferris Road. I sat in my car in the gravel lot for a long while. The wind was moving through the field to the west the same way it had moved the morning I first stood there with the deed in my pocket. The blank metal sign on the pole caught the afternoon light. I thought about Derek saying that labor was not an asset. I thought about the 7 hours I had spent in the storage room before I ever touched that cabinet, sweeping, photographing, logging, and I thought about how the value of a thing and the story people tell about it are rarely the same document. That evening, I called my mother. Not to announce. Not to explain. I said, I need you and Dad and Derek to meet me at the station tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. There's something I want to show you. My mother said, Is everything all right? I said, Yes. There was a pause. Mara. 10 o'clock, I said. I'll have coffee. They came. All 3 of them. I led them through the front door of the convenience store and through to the storage room. The work light was already on. I laid the folder on the workbench. I laid the county-stamped copies beside it, and I set my phone open to the recorder's parcel entry beside those. I did not say anything while they took it in. The room, the cabinet, the documents in a row. My father put on his reading glasses and leaned over the documents. My mother stood very still with her hands folded at her waist. Derek picked up the top sheet and read it and set it back down. I said, The mineral rights transferred with the deed. They've been unencumbered since 1994. The county appraised them at $618,500. That's separate from the structure and the lot. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Derek said, How did you? I opened the file cabinet, I said. He looked at the cabinet. Then at me. You bought this place for $84,000. $84,300, I said. My father took off his reading glasses. He folded them carefully and put them in his shirt pocket. He looked at the plat map for a long time without saying anything. I did not raise my voice. I did not list what had been said at that dinner table. I did not need to. You called my choices ungrateful, I said quietly. I think what you were actually describing was unfamiliar. I don't think those 2 things are the same. My mother looked at the floor. My father looked at the window. Derek looked at the documents on the workbench. I'm not asking for an apology, I said. I'm showing you the station. Because this is mine. I built this from what I had. I picked up the phone and the folder and walked back out into the lot. 6 months later, I am still at Ferris Road Station. The permits came through in February. The front window is glass now, not plywood, and the sign on the pole has new letters, plain white on black, because I chose them myself. I had a contractor walk the pump islands last week. He left a report on the workbench, 6 pages, and I read every line of it the same way I have read every document that has crossed that surface. Carefully, and with the understanding that the numbers on paper are only the beginning of what something is worth. The mineral rights are under a separate evaluation with a geologist I found through the county's resource office. I have not cashed anything yet. The evaluation is a process, and the process takes the time it takes, and I have learned over the past 6 months that the thing you wait for carefully is not the same thing as the thing you rush. I keep the county-stamped deed copies in a flat metal document box on the shelf above the workbench. Every morning when I come in, I set my coffee on top of that box while I clip on the work light. It is not decorative. It is just where things land when your hands are full and you know exactly where everything is. Derek sent a text in March. 2 sentences, heard the evaluation came back. If you need any help navigating next steps, I know some people. I read it once and set the phone face down on the counter. I have not replied. The people I grew up around had a very specific idea of what financial sense looked like. A steady job, a recognizable title, a salary someone else could verify. I do not hold that against them. Those are not wrong things. They are just not the only things. I learned something in that storage room. The value was always there. It was there before they told me I was a failure. It was there while Derek laughed. It was there in a file cabinet that nobody had opened in 30 years, waiting for someone willing to cut the padlock and pull the drawer. I did not find it because I was lucky. I found it because I showed up. If this story landed with you, if you know someone who kept going when everyone told them to stop, share it. Leave it for the person who needs to hear that the value was always there. They just had to be the one to open the drawer. Every morning I clip on that work light and I look at what this place is becoming and I think about what else it has not shown me yet.